Before we get talking about port scanning, it's probably useful to talk a little bit about ports. We've actually been using ports without really talking about what they are. Now, when you're doing network communication, you need a way of addressing the system that you are communicating with, just as when you're mailing a letter, you need to put an address on it. In the case of the systems that we have been working with, we've been using IP addresses. Well, that's one way of addressing a system. You can think of this maybe as a zip code. So, a zip code will get you to a particular location, but beyond that, you need to know exactly where it is that you need your messages to go. That's why we use ports. Ports give you the ability to address not only a system, but a particular application. So on this system, for example, we've got some services that are listening, actually, really only one service that's listening. And in this case, this is a DHCP service that's listening. We've got a port here. And if I change this a little bit and say -n for numeric only and then go back up, you can see that what we've got here is listening on port 68. So that's the port that is being listened on. Now, as we're going to go through port scanning, we're going to be communicating with ports in order to determine whether they are open or not. An open port means that there is an application listening and that port is available to communicate with. A closed port means that there's nothing listening on the other end, and so there's no way to communicate with anything. Even though we know, for example, port 80 is a web server, if we try to communicate on port 80 and nothing responds on port 80, that means there's no web server listening at that particular service. We're also going to run into cases where we may see filtered responses coming back from our port scanners, and that could mean a couple of things. It could mean that there's a firewall which is blocking the response back because when we are communicating doing port scanning, we expect responses back. So we either expect something that says, yes, I'm open, or something that says, no, I'm not open, go away. If we don't get anything back at all, we don't really know how to interpret that. It could mean that there's something that's open and it's just not open for us in particular because a firewall is blocking our IP address. Or it could mean that the message got lost, for example, and just never got through. If that's the case, if we don't get any response at all back, then it may say that it's filtered. So we're going to see open, closed, and filtered as we do port scanning. Just keep in mind that the IP address is how you get to the system. The port is how you get to the application that is listening on that system.